All right, so this is part two of our series with Avi on the response to COVID-19. First episode, we covered the response for its communities and the most vulnerable, and today we're going to focus on business and how data leaders should be responding to this crisis. So the question I wanted to cover with you today, Avi, was how can businesses make more effective data-driven decisions over the next 6 months? So that's everything from deciding what to prioritize from acquiry to storage, and then how should they be balancing both short-term and long-term investment decisions given the change in consumer behaviours over the next sort of 6 months. So how are you thinking through that
Okay.
problem?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with two opening statements
Yeah.
on this, and I think they're both important. We are in an unprecedented emergency, and we're going through things that none of us have experienced ever before. That's true.
Yeah.
However, the law remains the law, and regulation remains regulation. So everything that we need to do from a data perspective has to remain within the law and in line with the data protection, GDPR, and all those other good things that we've been used to working with. And I think businesses that don't remember that will rue that decision, because there is no point capturing data today if you find yourself in a month's time or 2 months' time or 3 months' time unable to use it legally.
Yeah.
So even though it seems like a bit of an overhead and something that's not quite right with the urgency of doing things right now, you need to be thinking and doing things properly. Okay.
Yeah.
And the second side of that is the corollary is capture data now.
Yeah.
Okay. And good enough is good enough. And I said that in the first episode.
Yeah.
Good enough is good enough. So don't worry necessarily about setting up complex IT systems in order to get to the data. Make sure it's secure. Make sure you're looking after it well. But simple solutions are good enough for now. But make sure you get the data. Don't let setting up a system stop you from capturing data now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fast and the dead, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's the fast and the dead.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about always holding that balance in your mind. It's got to be done properly, it's got to be done securely, but equally do it in a way that is good enough that meets the demands of regulation. And simply remembering always that we as data professionals are custodians of the data that's given to us. It's up to us to take good care of it. So the thing that's really sort of striking me is how businesses are innovating in a very, very, very difficult set of circumstances. In fact, I just got an email now from a local company that offers an in-house sort of tapas kind of model of lunchtime meals and early evening meals for people coming, at work and on their way home from work. And, they've sent out a great email now talking about they're a local business. We want to stay active in the community. We are under threat because we've had to close, and we're looking for new ideas of how to work with you, our customers. Right, yeah. And I think that's a great opening approach. And they've already set out some ideas about how they might move towards a more delivery model and bringing food to people, because clearly we can't go out to buy those things. And I'm just thinking, about that, and they will get some responses, they'll get questions. So in that scenario, you want to capture those responses. And even if today people say, great idea, but actually right now, I'm really not interested in buying, your product in, you've got a bit of a lead there. Somebody's saying, actually, I like the idea. So while that might not be the idea for today, that might be the idea for 3 months' time or 6 months' time when you decide to diversify your business. Or even more, as people, for instance, may well change their patterns and say, I'm going to consume more at home than I used to consume because I've got used to that. And actually, it's okay. I quite like spending time with my family in doing those things. So there's a good example. I'm hoping that they're capturing the feedback, even the feedback that isn't necessarily relevant for now.
Yes. And so what you're saying there is it's a good time to run experiments to test innovation and capture the right data to be able to drive that if necessary.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the way I'm sort of looking at it is in a now and next mode.
Yeah.
So when we think about now, we have to deal with the situation as it is. We have to think about most people are socially distancing in some way or another. Many of us are confined to our homes for most of the day. So that's the now situation. What most of us need at the moment is for our most basic needs to be met. But interestingly, I was having a conversation with somebody earlier who said they're waiting for a ping pong table to be delivered. And I quipped, well, that's not really an emergency sort of piece of kit. And he says, when you've got 3 kids in the house, it's an emergency piece of kit. So again, you know, it's about that thinking. What do we mean by emergency? What do we mean by necessity? So, yeah. And then on the other hand, you know, we don't want to be offering services that clearly are not relevant for now.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a bit of experimentation. I think what you've said is try things, go out there, put it out to your customers.
And also, that's a good example of, you know, there's a lot of assumptions we're making about consumer behaviour. It's a good time now to run experiments to test those assumptions about what people will be buying. The ping pong table is a great example. You know, your thinking is people are going to be rationalising, you know, buying the basics, but that's probably not the case. It's a good time to diversify and test those assumptions.
Absolutely. And I think another real opportunity is to open up new channels of communication. So if you're relying on people dropping in, if you're relying on footfall, clearly you're going to have to reach out differently. But again, if you're talking now about entering into the world of social selling for the very first time, you may be learning some really, really interesting things. I think another area, and it does tie back to our previous conversation, is there are networks spinning up all across this country of local neighborhood volunteer mutual aid communities. Each one of those is an entry point for you as a business to offer services now. And it might be at the level of saying, actually, I'm just here to help. But you then establish a relationship with a new network which you've never worked before.
Yeah.
So what you don't want to be doing is losing that information when we move from this crisis mode into whatever the new normality looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point. So what you're saying is these new networks and groups that are forming because of the crisis are an opportunity to get in with those groups and build relationships beyond the crisis.
Absolutely. And, you know, I don't think that's, you know, should be seen in any way as being cynical or exploitative. You know, there are things that need to be done now. People need to get to services. People need information. People need products, all sorts of things. They need help. So you can certainly be a company that is engaging in the national effort to save lives. And at the same time, think ahead and say, well, how is that network going to look, you know, in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time? How am I going to build on the goodwill that I've established with a new community? And continue working with them. And that's where I think the question of data expertise really comes into play. That data does need to be captured. It does need to be stored safely. It does need to be thought about how you're going to analyze it and understand it as you move forward. So if you're not capturing the right information right now, it can be quite difficult. So, you know, an example being, and a really, really simple example, you're working with a local group in your street or, you know, your neighbors, and you don't bother to capture postcode information because everybody lives in the same locality. But as you start to expand and you start bringing more and more people in, you think, oh, actually knowing the postcodes would have been really useful. And, you know, and it sounds really, really a small point, but the number of times as a data professional, I've come in and looked at data that's being captured even in calm times and say, really, you haven't thought about capturing this or this? So having somebody coming in, perhaps from outside your organization, and just casting an eye over it and saying, perhaps you could be thinking about this or thinking about that, could be really, really useful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's an interesting example I had it was a couple of weeks ago now, a week and a half ago. I won't name the client, but it's a particular business. They've acquired some businesses they're very outdoor focused. So clearly catastrophic times, but for that acquisition. But they had a big data warehouse program planned, and they've canned that project immediately just because they can't see the value in that in sort of the short and medium term because of the crisis. So it just got me thinking, how do you balance short and long term in all of this? Because there's a long term strategy that you want to deliver on. But clearly the extent of this crisis means that there will have to be an emphasis on reasonably short, medium term, because SMEs won't be able to sort of support a big data program that is sort of the antithesis of what's going on at the moment. So I don't know if there's a right answer there, but it's just interesting, that balance between short and long term, and how you can think about that.
Actually, I think it's a great question, and I'm probably going to give a slightly provocative answer
Yeah.
to that question. If you've just canned a program of work that you've been working on for many months, or perhaps longer, and you've invested, you know, a significant amount of your company's resources, be that time or money, and you've decided now to switch it off, you've got to ask yourself, why did you do it in the first place? And I think what happens at this point is it really hones those key questions of the value proposition of what you're doing. And you know, we've together, you know, looked at many data programs and asked that questions and said, you know, the real question of why are you doing this? What is the value proposition of what you're doing? And if that value proposition doesn't stand up now, then when is it going to stand up? Because when did you need data more than you need it now? When did you need to know who your customers are, what your product set is, how it's being delivered, your levels, your supply chain, whatever your data program was trying to look at? How are you going to identify your customers who are likely to be in the greatest need? Let's take the example of the supermarkets. And I have to say, credit to them, they seem to be doing a pretty good job. And I'm not going to say the ones I think are doing a better job or a less good job. I'll keep that to myself for the moment. But you know, they've really segmented their data, understood which customers are experiencing difficulty in the most basic thing of coming into the supermarket and buying eggs and bread. And they've taken action, and they've said, in our supermarket, we need to set aside an hour every morning for. And actually, no, we're not going to do an hour every morning. We're doing a half an hour earlier for NHS staff, because we've seen that the football was just chaotic. They're looking at their product lines and saying, look, these are the essentials. These are the things people need. We're going to create more shelf space for those products. Now, if your data systems don't allow you to do that, and you didn't have programs of data to do that, you're in trouble. And rightly so. And you should be. So I think to your question is exactly, my answer to your question is exactly that. If you're questioning why you're doing it, then you should have been questioning why you were doing it beforehand. And it's a great time to be asking the question.
So what you're saying there is, this is a great time to stress test your value proposition and your supply chain to say, does it make sense what we're doing here for variable scenarios? And if it completely falls down now, then there's a weakness in your business model that has been identified now, and that you need to change now.
And, you know, absolutely. And, you know, clearly you don't build for the once in a century crisis. You know, that's not what you do. But what we have here is really basic data needs that should be addressed by systems. And you, again, as I say, you need to be coming back to your data departments. And if they're unable to address those, say, have you had your priorities right? And don't do that in a way that is saying, not as a hostile way of asking them, but just coming back and saying, have we really been looking at the right things that matter to our business? So we really taking care to understand our customers. And you mentioned vulnerability, and I think it's something that we should focus on, because it is about what we're doing now, is knowing those customers who we need to be giving that little extra bit of help, that little extra bit of support, and making sure we're reaching them. And I think also one of the things, the other side, and you know, it comes off to your marketing and your communication strategies, understanding how customers are responding to your communications channels, and also looking to open up new communication channels that are emerging. And again, I was chatting with somebody about this morning. We now have a new demographic, which is the older demographic, mainly using social platforms to interact. I know I was at a party yesterday,
you go to
an 80th birthday party on Zoom.
Wow, amazing.
And it was great, and it was lovely. But the point being, suddenly that was a whole demographic of people who have not used that kind of technology in that way. What opportunities are there for businesses to look at that?
Great. That's a great note to finish on, Avi. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.